What would you like to pitch to the group?
Okay, I want to make a super quick mini pitch to the chat and those out beyond. I would love to see like a documentary on kayfabe from the TLC, because the last like week I have watched so many videos and seen this one topic like grow across different people's channels, and that has like helped me understand and find my own language for what kayfabe is. But for pitch for the estuary, I'm just thinking a lot about like what a word is, because in some sense it's like when I listen to theological conversations, whatever the person's background is, it's like, are you defining that word in Greek, or are you defining that word in Latin, or are you going for a Hebrew definition, or are we just using an English definition? And there's been a few times recently where I've listened to something in the TLC from like 2 years ago. Somebody sends me, I'm going, I feel like we're just operating on completely different definitions of words. And so there's no way that you can be able to like have the same conversation. But then when I get into like a definition and into like some kind of etymology, I'm like, what's behind a word? What is this thing that is transferring from language to language? I guess my current opinion is that it's like a picture. That in some sense, like the Lascaux caves were like paintings where people were like trying to match reality. And then that gets maybe condensed in some kind of hieroglyph, and that gets condensed into some kind of word. And that behind every word is a picture. And that picture is more helpful for trying to transfer consciousness from one brain to another and have a conversation.
All right. Wow. That was quite a pitch. Thank you, Ethan. Matt, would you like me to call you Skankenstein? Which would
That's fine. That's fine. I was just connecting that with my chat name when I'm just walking around. I'm very excited about this group. I want to talk about kayfabe, but I can't like carry that conversation. So couldn't be happier that Michael is here. Specifically, I want to talk about the spirituality of Calvinist kayfabe. Basically, if kayfabe is a participatory narrative, so it's a scripted narrative that the audience gets to participate in, I think that's an interesting lens to think about how Calvinists specifically talk about providence, God's writing of history, authoring of history, whether or not we have free will. And also the ways it's an interesting lens to think about the ways in which, I mean, the common question is like, well, if God's already scripted everything, chosen everything, defined everything, what is there for us to do? And that's, I think, where the participating element becomes really, really important. There were some live streams earlier talking about prayer and lament in particular. And I think that's one way in which at least we as the audience participate by booing the narrative action that's on screen. I think that's pretty clear. I'm not quite sure how we as the audience in Calvinist kayfabe express our like cheers and approval. What's the best way to do it? I'm sure liturgy plays into this somehow, but I don't know how. So that's what I want to talk about.
Wow, I agree. I think this is I didn't know how this group was going to flesh out, but I'm super happy with it. This is going to be a super interesting group for this. Rod, you get to pitch. What pitch you, Rod?
Well, I too came at least prepared to talk about kayfabe, although I was probably going to be one of the skeptics with a bit of a focus on those perpetuating the kayfabe. But since I think that's pretty well covered, and I have a little bit of a custom now, throwing two things out, see if I can get two for the price of one. The other thing that I've been thinking more about myself is this notion of chosen versus unchosen relationships. And something I first encountered, 15 or 20 years ago, and it was in the context of people who are in relationship with people with personality disorders or other mental illnesses, and the distinction between those, whether it's a family member, that kind of thing, an unchosen relationship, and for those where it was a chosen relationship, like a romantic partner, a spouse, a girlfriend, boyfriend, that kind of thing. And the coping mechanisms were different depending on what kind of relationship it was. And the emphasis was on helping people where it was not a chosen relationship. It was, where it was a chosen relationship. to help those people perhaps extricate themselves because they didn't have to be there, basically. And for the rest, it was like, well, good luck. So that was the initial context. But over the years, that frame has been really useful to me in thinking about the full optionality that I think most of us would celebrate in terms of who we get to hang out with. We get to decide who we're going to be close to. We have something called the freedom of assembly. There's also implied in that the freedom to not assemble. In other words, you get to decide who you're going to hang out with. And I think most of us like that idea, at least in principle. But it's occurred to me lately, and this is kind of the new part of my thinking, is for essentially all of human history, every single one of your relationships would have been unchosen. I don't know how far back, 5 or 10,000 years, your entire life would be decided for you, where the time you were born and the family you're born into, the tribe, the language, everything, right? Your roles would have been very well defined for you. And frankly, as recently as probably the Industrial Revolution, this would probably been true for most parts of the world, and maybe still true for parts of it today. And my point is that I'm not sure that we're evolved as a species to operate in a world of exclusively chosen relationships. And you might argue that the signs of things coming apart in almost every direction is that we're actually not very well suited to be able to operate the way we think we want to operate, which is we want to be able to decide who we hang out with. So I think there's just a lot of gold there, and so that's my topic.
All right. Well, that's a good one. Now, a little word to you, Bern. For many people who it's their first time with an estuary, they sort of confuse round 2 and round 3. You certainly can refer to a previous pitch, but you're better off giving us a pitch that's not. All right, good. Go for it, Bern.
Don't worry about it. No, I was just watching a video today by a Polish retro fashion influencer, and she was.
You too? Sorry.
That's a rock band. So she was talking about how every time she said she was 31 years old now. I've been following her one way or another for quite a few years, but she said people are now criticizing her for signs of aging. And the point of her video was, she says, can I just age in peace? And she talked about how people now are seeing aging as a disease, the younger people. So that so many TikTok influencers and Instagrammers and whatnot are basically on this thing where it's like there's something wrong with you if you're aging. On top of that, I noticed a couple weeks back that Megyn Kelly was interviewing this guy. I don't remember his name. That's probably for the best because I really didn't like what he was saying. But he was talking about how we know enough about supplements and what we need, as far as blood work and all this stuff to live, 200 years or whatever. And I thought to myself, what is this thing that is happening to us? And I take it back. I've been thinking about this for many years. It's like our basic antipathy towards the effects of time. And so I just thought of this as another illustration of how we live against time, not within time. So that's my thought.
Wow. I write down these pitches because I have to remember them, especially in the process of the group. Michael Sartori, you get to pitch. What pitch you?
Okay. Well, I guess I will go with the wrestling thing in a way, because okay, so I'm going to say the thing about like professional wrestling is it is an art form that is currently evolving and is seemingly successfully mastered the format of television, and it is flourishing in the age of the internet with the multi media component of it, seeping out of the ring, out of the arena, off the screen, and into people's social media feeds and things like that. And I think so. One thing that I think is maybe worth considering about it is how it gives us a more vivid portrayal of something. Like with Ethan's question, talking about like the problem of defining words. Well, you don't have to define a word if you are talking about an event and with people involved in it, you know. So, like a written description of something that happens in a wrestling ring, that could be debated, like what happened. But when you see it, it's much more clear. Although there is the whole question of camera angles. And I think the other kind of thing that it helps think about, maybe perhaps with both Rod's thing and Burns, is the unchosenness of our relationships and times, because on this there is a freedom to craft a persona, there is a freedom to shape your identity, both in wrestling, and I would say just like on the age of the internet. But you're going to come up to constraints about how successful you are, and those are very much tied to things like the unchosen aspects of where you were born and who your parents are, and your progress in life through time. So the narrative aspect of it. So, so that's the idea. Why wrestling is like the greatest thing to explain life in the 21st century.
Wow. I feel zero need to pitch because everyone got up on that mound, and those are some amazing pitches. So I will pass on this round. And now we get into the pointing round, where point to somebody else's idea and tell us why it grabbed you. Ethan, what pitch did you hear that most colonized you, and why?
Rods.
Hmm.
Because it reminded me of so many of the things I've heard, like as a 33-year-old person. So of course, all of us men at least listen to Andrew Huberman, and there's this idea that like we are living outside of our, I don't know, evolutionary destiny, or outside of our intended ecosystem. And so we get light in the morning like our ancestors used to, or we try to go beyond the bounds of social groups. So I know Rob was just talking about social groups, I think, but all the different ways that humans don't seem to be functioning like humans because of the technology we've built that blocks us from a natural environment. So, Rod.
All right. So, Rod. Matt, what do you want to point to?
This is difficult to choose. I really love how Rods and Burns kind of really connect together, the unchosenness of two aspects of life, and how those have been very traumatically, or like how the culture recognizes and valorizes these unchosen things has been dramatically redefined in the last several years. I can see how that ties into discussions of Kayfabe. So, yeah, the thing that most stood out to me when it comes to Rod talking about like chosen versus unchosen relationships is sort of the, for me, kind of like the ambiguity of what like if you're involved in the church, like a church relationship is. Because the one hand, it wants to make itself this, we're family, we're this unchosen bond. But at least in most of my experiences, those connections have been pretty tenuous. And in my current stage of life, I'm trying to figure out how to adequately maintain my chosen bonds when I live on the other side of the country from most of my siblings and my parents. So I'm trying to figure out how to be a good, responsible, active, like dutiful son and brother when circumstances make that really, really difficult. So yeah, got a lot to say about that. I have a lot to say about words if we shift to words with Ethan, but that's the big thing that grabbed me, was connecting that with Rod.
All right. Wow. 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 Rod, you've had 2 votes already, but you got to vote for someone else. Where are you going to point?
Well, Matt kind of gave me an easy out, which is he kind of saw how Byrne and my kind of go together, and I was going to vote for Byrne. um, uh, Aging. Um, it occurred to me when some of the, we lost some rock stars young, right? Famously, Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison and so forth, Joni. And then we lost a few to like overdoses and heart attacks and people like Tom Petty and right. But the real legends haven't died yet.
Hmm.
And there's something. It occurred to me that when we lose Bob Dylan or we lose Bruce Springsteen or the Rolling Stones finally stop, that we're not ready for that in the West. We're not ready for our sort of the cultural icons of the 20th century to finally just expire. And so, the sort of inescapability of age and death, sort of blasted through that lens of culture, I think is something that will be quite profound. So I'm interested in Byrne's topic.
All right. There you go, Byrne. You've got a vote. What do you want to point to, Byrne?
Rod. I just thought
we worked this out ahead of time.
With mine, but it dovetailed with everyone's too, because so much of this is about presentation and about how we appear, as faces in this thing we're doing. And it's not just us, of course; it's everything and everybody. And so the kayfabe is the scripted presentation. So even me doing this is a scripted presentation in a sense. I have to set myself up before the camera. I have to, make sure I have something to drink. I have to, say to myself, what am I going to say a bit? But fortunately, we do have freedom. So, yeah. What does it mean to be a chosen personality?
Michael, the downside of voting last or second to last is that I don't know if you're going to be able. You don't have enough pointing to shake the vote, but your words can shape the conversation. So, what do you want to point to?
Well, then, because it's a lost cause, I will choose to point to Ethan's, because I think that is a big part of reconciling ourselves with the chosen and unchosen nature of our relationships. Is who do we feel like when we say words we mean the same thing, and what do we do with these people who somehow seem to understand something completely different when we use the same set of words to speak about something? So I'm sure we can work that in at some point a little bit.
All right. I really have to. I mean, Matt really colonized me with sort of the overlap between Rod's and Byrne's pitches, and especially in terms of how we have this mixture of chosen and unchosen bonds, and how the chosenness and unchosenness, which Rod highlighted, how that goes through time. Because Rod, of course, has been part of the marriage crisis conversation. We really have to get our 2 other partners back on the channel again soon. But this, and then when Matt talked about too, as does Rod. I mean, Rod and I both have families, on both sides of the continent now, and many people in California, there's a reason they called it flyover country, because you're always flying back and forth to get back to your family on the East Coast. And this dynamic, but then also but boy, Calvinist kayfabe, that of course grabbed me pretty hard, because I do get annoyed when people sort of reduce what they know of Calvinism down to sort of a determinism. And I understand that, but most of what Calvin wrote and did about didn't touch on that. What Calvin was a synthesizer of a lot of those Protestant reformational themes, and he was a second generation reformer, so he basically took a lot of themes and took the rough edges off it. And the one thing that Calvin sort of turned the volume up on was double predestination, which of course has, but that then gets into again this chosen and unchosenness. And when you look at the 5 points of Calvinism, one of my favorite points of Calvinism is actually the last one in Tulip, which is perseverance of the saints, which very much has a lot to do with a lot of those issues that Rod is talking about chosen versus unchosen. And so, boy, you guys have put a lot of rich things on the table, and I don't think Ethan's pitch can really be ignored either. Here I've gone and done what I've told all of you not to do. But Ethan's pitch, to what degree we've got words. In one way to describe the Protestant Reformation is words versus pictures as faithful consciousness conveyors. And one of the things that has happened, especially when television came on and movies and now the internet, in which image manipulation goes supernova, I think, the Kayfabe observations are really important in that. I think Michael is correct in that right now there's a lot of conversations about, even if you listen to someone like Ethan Klein or Ezra Klein, the Democrats were sort of the winners of mass media television, sort of curated, controlled, gate-kept messaging, but sort of the new Republicans have gone on, and Donald Trump goes on Joe Rogan without a care in the world. He is in his element talking to Joe, whereas Kamala Harris, she didn't want to go on Joe Rogan because there was no script. And who knows, if you're sitting with that guy for 2-3 hours, who knows what he's going to pull out of you and what you're going to say that's going to violate the corporate script. So bang, have at it, boys and girls. All boys, all beards, but there we are.
Let me throw one wrestling question since you brought up politics. Is it true there was a wrestler called Kamala or Kamala? Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we know who that wrestler endorsed this past election?
No.